Hello, this is Craig Wesco recording for TCGplayer.com, and today we're going to be playing Black-White Vampires in Standard. So this is a list that I got from Fulgence. They are a Magic Online player, and they've been doing really well with this deck, and they haven't been changing many of the cards, only a few cards here and there. So I feel like it's been tuned pretty well, and I really like what they've been doing with the sideboard. So the sideboard in particular, I think has a lot of room to maneuver depending on what the opponent's doing. So if they're playing a fast aggressive deck, you have access to these fatal pushes to buy time to set up and not get beat down by their early threats. If they're playing a red deck, you have these Authority of the Consuls to gain life, make their haste creatures enter tapped. And then if they're playing a more controlling deck, you have Duress to strip cards out of their hand, especially like a key element to what they're doing, maybe a Fumigate, another sort of, so the sweepers are pretty good against this deck, so whether it's a red sweeper, white sweeper, whatever it is, get to strip it out. Also good against things like Godpharaoh's Gift. Um, and then other cards against control decks, you have cards like Scrapheap Scrounger, very difficult threat to deal with. Also, Argwell's Bloodfast. This is kind of the windmill slam card that you want against the control decks. So if the opponent just wants to load up on removal spells against our creature deck, well, this is a way to gain a bunch of card advantage. And then against mid-range type decks that just want to take over the game with like a 5-drop, something like a Scarab God or a Glorybringer or something like that. Well, those kinds of matchups are where Profane Procession really shines, because anytime they're trying to invest a bunch of mana into a single threat, well, we can invest that same amount of mana into exiling that threat, and then invest that mana into exiling your next threat, and then invest that mana again to exile your next threat, and then it transforms, and then we get to start playing your threats and beating you with your own threats. So Procession's really good in those matchups. So I feel like we have a lot of sort of really high impact sideboard cards that allow us to sort of transform our deck in ways that really benefits us in a variety of different kinds of matchups. So the sideboard is really nice. I like it. And then we have a Fragmentize, just it comes in a lot of different matchups. Just, as a final card, it's good against various things. There's a lot of artifacts and enchantments going around. So basically, the main deck now, the main deck is doing some really cool things too. It's a creature deck that wants to curve out. So you have like 1-drop creatures, 2-drop creatures, 3-drop, 4-drop, 5-drop. So it is, of course, a Craig Wesco style of deck where you just play creatures each turn. But then there's also a lot of Anthem effects in this deck, which is really cool. You have 4 Radiant Destiny. So it gives all your creatures, which all your creatures are vampires, so you just name vampire every time. And your creatures all get +1/+1. And then you can actually get the City's Blessing fairly consistently by about turn 5 usually, because you're going wide with all these token makers. You have like Call to the Feasts, you have the Legion Zealot replacing itself, you have Mavrin Vane making tokens. So you're able to get the City's Blessing pretty reliably, and then your creatures have Vigilance. And your other Anthem you have is Legion Lieutenant. So you have 4 Lieutenant and 4 Radiant Destiny to pump all your creatures. Then you also have Sheffet Dune as a one-shot way to pump them yet again. So now basically you curve out with creatures and you play anthems. So now you're going pretty wide. And then you have another payoff in Sanctum Seeker. So then you attack with all your creatures and you immediately drain them. So now it's going to be really difficult for them to try to race, not only because you're draining, but also because you have life linkers. So now they're forced to engage in combat, essentially. And that's going to basically, uh, you know, a token deck that's antheming, forcing the opponent to engage in combat, like that's going to favor us more likely than not, because we're using cards like Call to the Feast as a 3-for-1 if they're trading their creature that they cast by itself for a token, because we're basically 3-for-1ing them in that way. Now, the other way to get a lot of value out of the Call to the Feast is this Champion of Dusk. So Champion of Dusk is basically our big reload button. When we play out our hand, we curve out with creatures, and then it's like, well, we're playing these 2/1s for 2. We're playing a 1/1 for 2. Yeah, sure, it replaces itself. Playing a 2/1 for 1, and then we're playing these 1/1 tokens. Yeah, maybe we have an Anthem effect. Maybe our creatures are a little bit bigger, but we're not playing these glory bringers and high impact, large toughness creatures that are, going to be maybe the biggest creature on the board. So we don't just want to get brick walled and unable to fight through. So that's where the champion comes into play. Whenever the board gets stalled and we have all our creatures on the board, we just play a champion and refill our hand. And now it's like, okay, now we can afford to just jam all our creatures in the red zone and force, semi unfavorable trades just to declutter the board and deal the opponent a large chunk of damage, because we're just going to reload and keep playing creatures each turn. And so it's okay to lose out on some card advantage to get damage in and to kill the opponent's stuff, because champion allows us to do that. So basically, we have a bunch of creatures that you curve out playing. You have a bunch of anthems, and then you have Champion of Dusk as sort of the reload button. Even just if you have no other creatures and you just play Call to the Feast and then Champion, that's 4 cards. So you now have 4 creatures on the board, and you just drew 4 cards, and likely at least one of them is going to be an Anthem. So then you're going to have a 5/5 and a trio of 2/2s. So that's 11 damage off of 2 cards, and you're up 2 cards in addition to all these because you drew 4 cards off the champion. So the deck can really do some really cool explosive things, and I kind of like that it can curve out, it can go wide, it can go tall, it can win the card advantage game, and then it also has good sideboard options depending on what it's up against. And it also has a few removal spells. So it has 2 cast out, it has 1 Thopter Arrest, and it has 3 Ifnir Deadlands. Those are the main deck removal. I think that the 1 Thopter Arrest is basically just we're playing it over the 3rd cast out, mostly because there are situations where not so much that you want to kill something on turn 3, but more like you have access to, say, 5 mana on a turn, and you want to kill their thing. Like, let's say they played their Scarab God that you just have to answer this turn, but then you only have 5 mana, but you really want to also play something like a Legion Lieutenant on the same turn. You can do that if your removal spell costs 3, whereas you can't if it costs 5 or 4. I'm sorry. So I kind of like the flexibility afforded by the 2/1 split instead of the 3/0 split. And then the Ifnir Deadlands is kind of a reusable thing, because if you need to, you can sacrifice a Shephet Dune to kill a creature, and then reuse it the next turn to kill the next thing. And so yeah, this deck is really cool. I kind of like where it's at. I like the flexibility of it. I like the staying power of it. I like the sideboard options, and I like that it's a curve out creature deck. And of course, I like that it has white creatures. All right, so let's take it for a spin. Let's see it in action.